Rebeka. Once there was an old man whose wife had died when she was young, and he had to bring the 3 daughters up on his own. The eldest daughter was called Mary, the middle one was Rosie, and the name of the youngest was Rebeka. When Rebeka was 17, the old man also died and the 3 girls became orphans. Well, what could the 3 poor orphans do to make a living? One day the youngest girl had an idea. Sisters, we are old enough now and we can work hard. Let's go and harvest something. We could earn enough to keep us through the winter. Mary and Rosie agreed. They each took a sickle and set off to look for something to harvest. They walked and walked until they came to a field of wheat. The wheat was already ripe and Mary said, "Let's stop here and harvest it." "Leave it," said Rebeka. "This field is too small for us. Let's find a bigger one." The 3 girls walked on. Many days later, they finally found a field that was so big they couldn't even see where it ended. "This is perfect," smiled Rebeka. "If we work here, the wages we earn will last until next spring." "Isn't it too big?" asked Rosie. "Let's see," replied Rebeka. "We are hard-working girls, we'll manage it somehow." And with that, they entered the field. Rebeka went to work straight away, but the first time she cut some wheat, there was a deafening ringing sound. Sitting in his house, the 7-headed dragon who owned the field heard the sound clearly, and he thought back to what his mother had once told him. "Beware of a girl called Rebeka, my son. She will be your downfall." "I bet that is Rebeka now," growled the dragon, and he left the house and hurried to the field. When he saw the girls, he was furious. "I knew it was you, Rebeka. Who gave you permission to harvest my wheat?" "Nobody," replied Rebeka, "but it's ripe. If it isn't harvested now, it will go bad." "All right," grumbled the dragon. "I'll let you harvest it, but only if you can finish the whole field by the evening. If you don't, there you'll be in trouble." "We'll do it somehow," said Rebeka. "Very well," said the dragon. "Then let me bring you some breakfast." As soon as he was gone, Rebeka turned to her sisters. "He's planning something. Whatever he brings, don't eat anything but bread. The rest might be poisoned." Very soon the dragon returned with the breakfast, and he saw that half of the wheat had already been cut and tied up. "You are doing well," he said to the girls, "but it's time you had a break." The sisters sat down, but when he saw that they were only eating the bread, the dragon tried to tempt them. "Look at this delicious meat and wine. You must eat and drink to keep your strength up." "Thank you," said Rebeka, "but today we're fasting and we can eat nothing but bread." At noon, the dragon came again. This time he had brought some lunch, but just as before, the girls didn't touch anything except the bread. Even though the dragon tried very hard to persuade them to eat more, all they said was, "Thank you, but this is enough." "Very well, but don't forget the field must be finished before dark," said the dragon. By the time the sun went down, the girls were done with the harvest, and they went to the dragon's house to collect their wages. "All right, I'll pay you," he said, "but where will you sleep tonight? Have dinner and stay here. You can continue your journey in the morning." "Fine," answered Rebeka. "Come on, sisters," and they all went inside. When the dragon brought them their dinner for the 3rd time that day, all they ate was bread. Then they said they wanted to go to bed because they were very tired. "You'll be sleeping together with my daughters," said the dragon, and he led them to a big room with 6 beds. In 3 of the beds, the dragon's daughters were already fast asleep. The 3 sisters got into their beds and Mary and Rosie soon fell asleep. Rebeka, however, stayed wide awake. She knew the dragon was planning something again. Just then, the dragon tiptoed into the room. First, he went over to his daughter's bed and put her red cloths on top of each blanket. Then he crept up to the girls' beds, and on their blankets he laid white cloths. Rebeka knew that the dragon was leaving a sign. When it was midnight and the room was pitch black, he would still be able to see the white cloths and know which beds she and her sisters were sleeping in. As soon as he had left, Rebecca got up and switched the cloths around. Now the 3 white ones were on the beds of the dragon's daughters, and the 3 red ones were on the girls' beds. Then she woke up her sisters and whispered, "Get up! We've got to get out of here! The dragon is planning something again!" Mary and Rosie were still half asleep, but they left the dragon's house as quickly as they could. The 3 sisters walked all night, and just as it was starting to get light, they arrived at a big river. When they saw a tiny cottage at the water's edge, Rebecca went and knocked the door. The next moment, an old ferryman popped his head out. "What do you want?" "Take us over the river," begged Rebecca. "But please be quick. The 7-headed dragon is coming and he wants to kill us." "All right, jump in my boat," replied the ferryman. So the girls jumped in the boat, and the old man was soon rowing them to the other side. Back at the house, the dragon got up. He went into the big room, and although it was dark, he could still clearly see the white cloths on 3 of the beds. Sneaking up to the first one, he grabbed the sleeping girl from under the blanket and carried her to the kitchen. The previous evening, he had asked his wife to heat up the oven, and now he planned to throw the 3 sisters into the fire. Just as he opened the oven door, however, the girl he was holding under his arm woke up. "Father!" she cried. "What are you doing?" "Father?" growled the dragon. "Why do you call me that?" "Because I'm your daughter!" screamed the youngest dragon girl. Well, all this noise woke up the dragon's wife, and she ran into the kitchen. "What are you doing, you murderer? Do you want to burn your own daughter alive?" And with that, she started beating him with her rolling pin. "Oh no," the dragon shouted. "Rebecca has tricked me." He went back to the big room with a candle, but the 3 sisters were nowhere to be seen. He set off immediately and hurried to the river, but the ferryman's boat was already far from the shore. The dragon shook his fist angrily. "Hey, Rebecca!" he yelled. "You've outsmarted me, but it's all right. You just come to my house again and then I'll deal with you." "I'll be coming," replied Rebecca. "I'm not afraid of you, and you still owe us our wages for the harvest." By that time, the sisters were safely on the far side of the river, and although he was still furious, the dragon had no choice but to go back home. The girls thanked the ferryman for his help, said goodbye, and continued on their way. They walked and walked until they reached the city. After searching for a while, they found the royal palace, and they knocked on the gates. A guard came out and asked what they wanted. "We are poor girls, would like to serve the king," they said. The guard led the sisters into the throne room. "So you want to serve me?" asked the king. "Well, what can you do?" "We'll do anything you command, your majesty," replied Rebecca. So the king spoke to the queen about which girl should do what. The 2 elder sisters were sent to work in the kitchen, but because she was clever and skillful, Rebecca was given a job as a maid. Time passed, and all 3 girls worked hard, but Mary and Rosie soon became unhappy that, while they were peeling potatoes and washing dishes in the kitchen, their sister was cleaning the palace's beautiful rooms, watering the flowers, and spending nearly all of her time near the queen. They were jealous of Rebecca, and they wanted to hurt her, but they had no idea how they could do it. One day, the king held a ball for all of his servants. Everyone who worked in the palace was there, except for Rebecca, who didn't really like to dance, but preferred walking in the garden and weeding the flower beds. At the ball, the eldest sister Mary was chatting to one of the butlers. "Our little sister is such a grand lady that she never mixes with the other servants. She thinks she is better than us." "Why does she think that?" asked the butler. "Because," replied Mary, "she boasts that if she wanted to, she could bring the king the big glowing cabbage that grows in the garden of the 7-headed dragon." The next day, when the butler was serving the king his lunch, he mentioned what Mary had told him. After he had eaten, the king called Rebecca to see him. "Did you go to the ball yesterday?" he asked her. "No, your majesty." "Then, where were you, boasting so proudly?" I haven't been boasting, Your Majesty." "Don't lie to me, girl," shouted the king. "Your own sister said that you'd been boasting about how you could bring me the glowing cabbage from the dragon's garden." This was how Rebeka found out that her sisters wanted to hurt her. She had only one choice, and so she replied to the king, "Very well, Your Majesty, then I'll bring it to you." As Rebeka left the room, she was very upset, but she started thinking about how she could fulfill the king's wish. She already knew that she had to return to the dragon's house anyway, so she walked to the big river and asked the ferryman to take her back to the other side. Poor Rebeka felt so sad that as she told the old man her story, there were tears in her eyes. "Don't cry, my girl," said the ferryman. "You just listen to me. Go there at night when the dragon is sleeping. You'll see the cabbage immediately because it shines like the sun. Just be careful that when you pull it up, its leaves don't touch the ground. If just one of them does, it will ring out, the dragon will wake up, and that will be the end of you. If you survive, I'll be waiting here to take you back over the river." When it was dark, and Rebeka knew that the dragon must be sleeping, she sneaked into his garden and crept quietly to the bright light that was glowing in one corner. She lay on her stomach, slipped her arms under the cabbage, and grabbed it by its stem. Then she stood up so carefully so that not a single leaf touched the ground. She pulled the cabbage out of the soil, roots and all, and hurried back to the river with it. She jumped into the ferryman's boat, and they were halfway across the river when the dragon appeared. "Hey, Rebeka!" he yelled. "You've stolen my cabbage. The next time I see you, I'll catch you, and then I'll show you who's boss." "Or I'll show you," Rebeka shouted back as the boat reached the far shore. After she had arrived back at the palace, the girl planted the glowing cabbage in the royal garden. Everyone who saw it thought it was wonderful, and the king was so pleased that he asked Rebeka to be his headmaid and serve him at his table. Now the two elder sisters were more jealous than ever. Not only had they failed to hurt Rebeka, but she'd even been promoted. Soon the king held another ball for his servants. Mary and Rosie started planning again, and Rosie said, "Let's say that Rebeka boasted that she could bring the king the dragon's magic horse." "Great idea," smiled Mary. And so at the ball, they made sure everybody knew what Rebeka was supposed to have said. Of course, the king heard about it, and the next day at lunch, he spoke to the girl. "I'm always the last one to know anything around here. You tell all the others everything, but you never tell me anything." "What did I tell the others, Your Majesty?" "You boasted that you could bring me the dragon's magic horse." "How could I have said such a thing? No one alive could do that." "Don't lie, Rebeka," said the king. "If you do this for me, I'll make you the head of all of my servants. But if you refuse, you may never enter my throne room again." Poor Rebeka. What could she do to make the king happy? What could she do to save her life? She returned to the river once more. When the ferryman found her, tears were streaming down her face. "Why are you crying, my girl?" asked the old man. "I received a new command from the king," replied Rebeka. "Now he wants me to bring him the dragon's magic horse." "Well," sighed the ferryman, "that's a pretty tough task, but don't lose hope. Let's cross the river. You can stay with me tonight, and I'm sure we'll come up with something in the morning." At breakfast the next morning, the ferryman smiled. "Listen to me, Rebeka. There is no way you can do it alone. But don't worry, I'll help you. This evening, we'll go to the dragon's house together. I'll sneak into the garden and dig a big hole. Then I'll pull up a cabbage and drop it so that it rings out. After that, I'll throw it into the hole and bury it. Well, when he hears the ringing, the dragon will come out. And when he sees that another cabbage is missing, he'll look everywhere for it. Only he won't be able to find it anywhere. Then he'll run to the river to try to catch you, but you won't be there. While I'm in the garden, you must hide in the dragon's stable. When he's gone, jump on his horse and ride to the river. Part of its magic is that it can run across water. It will carry you straight to the other side and you won't even get wet. That evening, everything happened just as they had planned. When the dragon heard the ringing, he rushed out into the garden. And when he saw that another cabbage was gone, he ran to the river. But at the river there was no one to be seen. At the same time, the ferryman went back home by a different route, and Rebeka took the dragon's horse and rode straight into the water on its back. In the meantime, the dragon had returned home for his horse so that he could chase Rebeka more quickly, but in the stable, his horse was nowhere to be found. He dashed back to the river again, and this time the ferryman was sitting outside his cottage. "Did you take that dirty thief to the other side?" growled the dragon. "I haven't taken anyone anywhere," replied the old man, "but I did see your horse running across the water with a girl on its back." Just then, the dragon spotted Rebeka on the far shore. He shook his fist angrily. "Stop, or I'll make you wish you'd never been born," he roared. "Or I'll do the same to you," shouted Rebeka back, and with that, she rode back to the palace. When he saw the wonderful horse, the king was overjoyed, and he immediately made Rebeka his head servant. Mary and Rosie were now desperate. While their little sister was rising higher and higher, they were slipping lower and lower. Now Rebeka was their boss, and she could order them to do anything she liked. The two elder girls agreed that now they had to come up with something that was absolutely impossible for Rebeka to do. At the next ball, they spread a rumor that Rebeka had boasted she could even bring the king the seven-headed dragon himself. The king called Rebeka to him. "That nasty dragon steals all my cows. My men are terrified of him, and he even threatens that one day he'll cross the river and destroy the whole city. If you bring him to me, I'll be the happiest king on earth." "But I never said I could do that," cried Rebeka in surprise. "You always deny how smart you are," replied the king. "I'm used to it by now. So off you go, and do as I command. If you bring me the dragon, I promise to adopt you as my own daughter and let you marry anyone you choose." Rebeka already knew that she would have to fulfill the king's wish or die trying. But what could she do? She walked down to the river yet again. When the ferryman saw her, he couldn't believe his eyes. "Are you back so soon?" "Yes, I'm back, but I think this will be the last time, whether I manage to carry out the king's command or not." "And what is his command?" "To capture the seven-headed dragon himself." "Well, that really does sound impossible," commented the ferryman. "But you just stay here with me, and we'll put our heads together until we've come up with something." So Rebeka spent the day with the old man, and the whole of the next day too. All the time they were trying hard to work out a perfect plan. Eventually the old man spoke. "You know, the only way you could get the dragon to the palace would be in a coffin." "Put him in a coffin? And how would I be able to kill him first?" "Oh, there's no need to kill him. We'll just figure out how to make him lie down in the coffin of his own free will. It's not a problem if he's not dead yet." "But how can I do that?" "Just listen to me. First, it's better if he doesn't know who you really are. So I'll disguise you that even your father wouldn't recognize you. Next, you go to the forest. You cut down a big tree and make a huge coffin out of it. Then you wait until the dragon passes by and asks what you are doing there. You tell him that Rebeka has died and the king has ordered you to make a coffin big enough for both the girl and her horse. After that, you somehow get him to test the coffin, and when he climbs into it, you slam the lid on him and nail it down as fast as you can. When he's safely inside, I'll help you to carry the coffin to the river." Not having much of a choice, Rebeka let the ferryman cut her hair very short. Then he made her a fake bird and fed her lots of onions to make her voice deeper. He put a hat on her head, gave her a bag of tools and food, and handed her a big, sharp axe. Rebeka set off, and she was soon in the middle of the forest. When she had found the biggest tree there, she started to swing her axe. She worked all day and all night, and in the end she managed to chop the tree down. After that, she cut off its branches and carved the coffin from its trunk. It took her a whole week, but finally the huge coffin was ready. Now Rebeka could rest. A day passed, and then another. Like a true woodcutter, the girl smoked a pipe, and when she got hungry, she ate the bacon, bread, and onions the ferryman had packed for her. On the third day, Rebeka was just chewing on a piece of bacon when the dragon suddenly appeared. "This is my forest," he growled. "What are you doing here, you foolish man?" "Have mercy on me, mighty dragon," begged the woodcutter in a deep voice. "I didn't want to come here, but the king over the river forced me to, because this is the only place where I can find the right wood for a coffin." "A coffin?" asked the dragon. "Who's dead?" "The king's most faithful servant, Rebeka." "Is Rebeka really dead?" "Yes, poor thing. She fell off her horse and broke her neck." "That is wonderful," grinned the dragon, and he jumped for joy. "My greatest enemy is dead. Now I have nothing to fear in the whole world." "Yes, Rebeka is dead. Now the king has ordered a coffin big enough for both her and her horse." "And is it ready yet?" "Almost. Come and have a look. I just hope it will be big enough." By this time, they had arrived at the coffin, and the dragon took a good look at it. "Of course it's big enough. Even I could fit inside." "Oh, I don't think you could," replied the woodcutter respectfully. "It's far too small for a mighty dragon like you." "You don't believe me? Just let me show you." And with that, the dragon climbed into the coffin and lay down. This was the moment Rebeka had been waiting for. She grabbed the lid, slammed it on top of the coffin, and quickly nailed it down. Dragon roared and wriggled, but he was trapped. He promised everything to the woodcutter, all the trees in the forest, 100 sacks of gold, half of his kingdom, but he received no reply. Not long after that, the ferryman appeared with a donkey and a cart. They lifted the heavy coffin onto the cart, and with the donkey pulling and Rebeka and the old man pushing, they managed to get it to the river. Then they loaded the coffin onto the boat and rowed it over to the far shore. When they got there, Rebeka sent a message to the king. "Send me men and horses. I have brought you a very special gift." The king was so excited that he immediately jumped on his horse, and with a band of knights, he rode down to the river. The knights put the coffin on a long cart, which was pulled by 4 horses, and they all went straight to the palace. When they arrived, the dragon began shouting from inside the coffin. "Your Majesty, let me out. I can't breathe in here." "If I do set you free," said the king, "what will you give me in return?" "I'll give you everything I have," wailed the dragon, "and I promise that I'll go far, far away and never bother anyone again." "All right," said the king, "it's a deal." And then he turned to his knights. "Take him to the top of the highest mountain, but don't let him out until you get there." And so the knights took the dragon far, far away, and no one ever saw him again. As for Rebeka, the king adopted her as his own daughter, and then she married the prince of the neighboring kingdom, who had secretly been in love with her for a long time. Rebeka became a queen, and she took her 2 sisters to her new palace. She didn't take revenge on Mary and Rosie, and they stopped trying to hurt her. Rebeka had them married to a carriage driver and a horseman, and they all lived happily ever after.